He crossed an entire continent on foot and on horseback. He never lost a single major battle in his life. By the age of 25, he had toppled the largest empire the world had ever seen. By 30, he ruled territories stretching from Greece to India. And by 32, he was dead, having spent almost his entire adult life at war, convinced until his final breath that he was descended from the gods themselves. This is the complete story of Alexander the Great, the boy king who refused to accept any limit to what one man could conquer. If you love stories of ambition with absolutely no ceiling, hit subscribe now, because this is the most complete telling of Alexander's life you'll find on this channel, from birth to death, in one single video. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Pella, capital of Macedon, a fierce rising power the older Greek city-states still regarded as semi-barbaric outsiders. His father, King Philip II, had transformed Macedon's army into a devastating fighting force built around the phalanx and long spears called sarissas. His mother, Olympias, claimed descent from Achilles and instilled in Alexander an unwavering belief he was destined for greatness. Recognizing his son's ambition, Philip hired Aristotle himself as Alexander's personal tutor, covering philosophy, medicine, science, and literature, especially Homer's Iliad, which Alexander kept with him his entire life, viewing Achilles as his personal standard for glory. At 16, Alexander served as regent and crushed a Thracian rebellion, founding a city named after himself. At 18, he commanded the decisive cavalry charge at the Battle of Coronea in 338 BC, crushing Athenian and Theban forces and establishing Macedonian dominance over Greece. In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated at his own daughter's wedding by a royal bodyguard, under circumstances still debated, with some ancient sources suggesting Olympias's possible involvement. Alexander moved swiftly, eliminating rival claimants, and was proclaimed king at just 20, inheriting his father's battle-tested army and his unfinished plans to invade Persia. One of the most famous stories from Alexander's childhood involves Bucephalus, a magnificent but seemingly uncontrollable horse Philip nearly rejected after it threw off every rider. The young Alexander noticed the horse was frightened by its own shadow, turned it to face the sun, and calmly mounted it before the astonished court. Philip reportedly told him Macedon would soon be too small to contain his ambitions. Bucephalus carried Alexander through nearly every major battle of the next 2 decades, until his death in India, after which Alexander founded a city, Bucephala, in his honor. When Philip first took power, Macedon was a poor, fragmented, militarily unremarkable kingdom. Over 2 decades, he transformed it into the most formidable military power in the Greek world, developing the sarissa-armed phalanx, an almost impenetrable wall of overlapping spear points, alongside the elite companion cavalry that Alexander himself would later command. Philip pioneered combined arms tactics that most traditional Greek hoplite armies simply couldn't counter. The Persian Achaemenid Empire Alexander set out to conquer had existed for over 2 centuries, ruling from Egypt to Central Asia and northern India through a sophisticated network of satraps, royal roads, and messenger relays, commanding seemingly limitless manpower and wealth. Previous Persian invasions of Greece under Darius I and Xerxes had left the Greek world with a lasting sense of Persian near-invincibility. That Alexander, from a kingdom barely a generation into regional power, could conceive of conquering this entire empire, let alone succeed, reflects the sheer scale of both his ambition and his tactical brilliance. Rumors that Alexander had died encouraged Thebes to rebel. Alexander marched south with shocking speed, and, when the city refused to surrender, stormed and completely destroyed it, killing or enslaving most of its population, sparing only the poet Pindar's house. The message was unmistakable. Rebellion meant total destruction. The remaining Greek states fell in line, and Alexander was confirmed as leader of the Corinthian League, authorized to lead the invasion of Persia. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with roughly 40,000 soldiers. vastly outmatched by Persian resources. He reportedly hurled his spear into Asian soil, declaring the continent his by right of conquest. At the Battle of the Granicus River, he personally led a bold cavalry charge, nearly losing his life before a decisive victory opened the way along the coast of Asia Minor. In the city of Gordium, Alexander encountered the legendary Gordian knot, said to be untieable by anyone except the future ruler of Asia. Rather than untangling it, he simply cut it with his sword, a moment that has endured for 2,000 years as a symbol of his direct, unconventional approach to impossible problems. In November 333 BC, Alexander faced King Darius III himself at the Battle of Issus. Despite being outnumbered, he charged directly at Darius's position. Darius fled, abandoning his own mother, wife, and children, who were captured. Alexander treated them with notable respect, significantly boosting his reputation across Persian territory. Rather than chase Darius immediately, Alexander secured the Mediterranean coast, culminating in the siege of Tyre in 332 BC. Facing a heavily fortified island city, he ordered an enormous stone causeway built from the mainland, a months-long engineering feat, before finally storming and brutally subduing the city. Alexander entered Egypt in 332 BC to a warm welcome from locals resentful of Persian rule. Egyptian priests crowned him pharaoh, and he founded Alexandria along the coast. He then made a dangerous desert journey to the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, where priests' words seemingly confirmed his divine parentage, a belief that only grew stronger for the rest of his life. In October 331 BC, Alexander faced Darius's full remaining strength at Gaugamela, arguably the finest tactical demonstration of his entire career. Darius chose and leveled the battlefield himself to maximize his scythe chariots and numerically overwhelming forces, some ancient sources suggesting a 5-to-1 advantage. Rather than a frontal clash, Alexander used a deliberate oblique formation to draw Persian cavalry away from their own center, creating a gap he personally exploited with a direct charge at Darius. This precise maneuver, executed amid a battle involving well over 100,000 soldiers, is still studied in military academies today. Darius fled a second time, shattering his authority across the empire. Alexander advanced into the magnificent capital of Persepolis, and after months of rest and plunder, burned the royal palace to the ground, debated by historians as either calculated revenge or a drunken, impulsive act. Pursuing the fleeing Darius, Alexander arrived too late. In 330 BC, Darius was betrayed and fatally wounded by his own governor, Bessus. Alexander gave his fallen rival a respectful royal burial, then used the murder as justification to continue his campaign eastward. The campaign across Bactria and Sogdiana brought years of grueling guerrilla warfare. In 327 BC came one of Alexander's most famous sieges, the Sogdian Rock, a natural fortress atop sheer cliffs, whose defenders mockingly told Alexander he'd need soldiers with wings to take it. Alexander called for volunteer mountain climbers, and several hundred scaled the rock face at night using spikes and rope. When defenders woke to find armed Macedonians above their walls, they surrendered immediately, stunned. It was here that Alexander first encountered Roxana among the captured nobility, and married her shortly afterward, his first formal marriage. In 328 BC, during a drunken argument over his adoption of Persian customs, Alexander fatally stabbed Clytus the Black, the man who had once saved his life at the Granicus, followed by genuine remorse. Around the same period, Alexander grew convinced Philotas, son of his senior general Parmenion, was plotting against him. Philotas was tortured and executed, and Alexander preemptively ordered Parmenion's execution too, despite his decades of loyal service, a sign of the immense psychological pressure and growing distance from his original Macedonian circle. In 326 BC, Alexander crossed into India, facing King Porus and as many as 200 war elephants at the Battle of the Hydaspes River. He devised an elaborate deception, moving troops up and down the riverbank for days to confuse Porus's scouts, before crossing several miles upstream under cover of a thunderstorm. The battle proved brutally difficult. His troops had never faced war elephants before, and the animals initially caused panic until his forces adapted, targeting the elephants' legs and drivers before turning the wounded animals back against Porus's own lines. Ancient sources suggest this was Alexander's costliest single battle in terms of casualties. Impressed by Porus's courage, Alexander asked how he wished to be treated. Porus replied, "Like a king," and Alexander restored him to his throne as an ally, expanding his territory. Wanting to push further toward the Ganges, Alexander instead met open refusal from his own exhausted soldiers at the Hyphasis River. Nearly 8 years of continuous campaigning had broken their will to continue. After days of anger, Alexander accepted the only defeat of his career, not from an enemy, but from his own army, and turned back. Choosing the brutal Gedrosian desert route home rather than easier paths, Alexander's forces suffered catastrophic losses to heat, dehydration, and starvation, by some estimates, more losses than in any single battle of his career. In 324 BC, Alexander organized a mass wedding at Susa, marrying Persian noblewomen himself and arranging marriages between his officers and Persian nobility to fuse the ruling elites, generating resentment among veteran Macedonians. This reflected a deliberate, broader policy. Rather than imposing Macedonian rule wholesale, Alexander retained loyal Persian administrators and adopted elements of Persian royal ceremony himself, including proskynesis, a prostration custom many of his own officers found deeply offensive against their more egalitarian Macedonian traditions. Historians still debate how much of this reflected calculated strategy versus genuine belief in his own semi-divine, universal kingship, but it remained a defining feature of his rule from Darius's death onward. Soon after the Susa weddings, Alexander's closest companion since childhood, Hephaestion, a relationship many ancient sources describe in terms echoing Achilles and Patroclus from the Iliad, died suddenly at Ecbatana. Alexander's grief bordered on derangement. An elaborate funeral, the execution of Hephaestion's physician, and reportedly the symbolic destruction of a temple in protest. Alexander's scientific curiosity, instilled by Aristotle, persisted throughout his campaigns. He brought scientists and naturalists to document unfamiliar flora, fauna, and cultures, sending specimens back to Aristotle himself. Ancient descriptions depict a man of short but powerful build, a distinctive tilted neck, and an intense gaze that left a lasting impression on nearly everyone who met him. Famously clean-shaven against convention, he set a style that spread across the Hellenistic world for generations. His restlessness was legendary, reportedly weeping upon learning of theoretical parallel worlds, because he hadn't yet conquered even the one he knew existed. In June 323 BC, while planning an invasion of Arabia, Alexander fell suddenly ill in Babylon after heavy drinking, developing a fever that worsened over 10 to 12 days until his death at just 32. The cause remains debated: malaria, typhoid, alcohol's effects, or even poisoning. Asked who should inherit his empire, he reportedly answered only to the strongest, a statement that would foreshadow decades of war among his own generals. At its height, Alexander's empire stretched from Greece and Macedon across the entire former Persian Empire, modern Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt, through Central Asia into modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and finally into Pakistan and northwestern India. No single political entity would match this territorial extent for centuries. His forces marched distances roughly equivalent to circling nearly half the Earth's circumference at that latitude, almost entirely on foot and horseback, through deserts, mountains, and rivers no organized European army had ever crossed before. With no accepted heir, Alexander's generals, the Diadochi, fought each other for over 4 decades. Perdiccas, initial regent, was assassinated by his own officers within a few years. Eumenes, one of the few non-Macedonian generals in Alexander's inner circle, fought a long campaign to preserve unity before his defeat and execution. Antigonus the One-Eyed came remarkably close to reuniting the empire under his own rule before being decisively defeated and killed at the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC by a coalition of rivals, a battle that confirmed the empire's permanent fragmentation. Alexander's infant son and disabled half-brother were both eventually murdered, ensuring no direct descendant would inherit any part of his empire. Ptolemy secured Egypt, founding a dynasty that lasted until Cleopatra. Seleucus built the enormous Seleucid Empire across the Middle East and Central Asia. Antigonus's own line eventually took Macedon and Greece itself, territories that, along with the other successor kingdoms, would only be fully absorbed by the expanding Roman Republic and Empire centuries later. Despite the fragmentation, Alexander's 13-year reign permanently spread Greek language, culture, and philosophy across an unprecedented expanse, launching the Hellenistic era. Alexandria became one of history's great centers of learning. Greek became the common language across huge portions of the Middle East and Central Asia for centuries, later facilitating the spread of Christianity itself. Military commanders from Julius Caesar to Napoleon openly cited Alexander as their personal standard of ambition. In 13 years as king, a man who took the throne at 20 marched his army roughly 11,000 miles, never suffered a decisive defeat, founded upwards of 20 cities across 3 continents, and reshaped the ancient world's political and cultural map for centuries after his death at 32. If you've enjoyed this complete journey through Alexander's remarkable life, from a young prince tutored by Aristotle to the conqueror of the largest empire the ancient world had ever known, subscribe and hit the bell for more complete life stories of history's most consequential, ambitious, and endlessly fascinating figures, because this channel is just getting started telling them.